Welcome, weary traveler. You've left behind the noise of the world and stepped into a realm untouched by time. Here, candlelight dances upon ancient stone walls, and the air carries the soft hum of forgotten lullabies beyond these gates. The night is gentle, and every story is a silver thread, weaving warmth around your heart. So, rest your mind. Let each word be a quiet step into the halls of dreams, until sleep, tender and deep, finds you. You are safe here, and slowly, the world drifts away. Settle in, take a slow breath, and let the story begin softly. Like a bell far in the distance, calling through mist. Chapter 1. The first bell at dawning, the hush before morning. When night still held the edges of the world in its cool embrace, the first bell of the village stirred. Its voice was not loud, not demanding. It was patient, deliberate, and ancient. The sound rolled through the gentle mist that lay over the meadows, finding its way between cottages of stone and timber, over thatched roofs still glistening with dew. Each note lingered in the air as though it had all the time in the world, which, in that moment, it did. The bell did not hurry. It did not command. It merely announced that dawn had come, that the world was waking, that it was safe now to rise from slumber. The village of Saint Aviel had known that bell for centuries. It hung in a small, sturdy tower beside the chapel, weathered by time and touched by countless seasons. Its bronze surface bore a patina of quiet devotion, green where rain had kissed it, dark where hands had polished its edge during repairs. It was not grand, not like the great cathedral bells of distant cities. Yet, to the people of Saint Aviel, it was the voice of time itself. Every day it began their rhythm, every sound a reminder that the world was steady, ordered, and kind. The bell ringer, a gentle soul named Father Ambrose, would always rise before the first hint of light. He was a man of few words, his hair now the color of the morning frost, his movements measured like prayer. When he climbed the spiral steps of the tower, his lantern swayed softly, sending circles of golden light across the stone walls. He liked to pause halfway up, listening to the silence below the soft breathing of the village, the rustle of doves nesting in the rafters, the whisper of wind against the shutters. He had learned, long ago, that silence was not emptiness. It was full of breath, of life, of the smallest, most tender sounds at the top of the tower. He would open the narrow window and let the cool dawn air flow in. It carried with it the smell of damp earth, wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of hay. He would look to the east, where a faint silver glow was gathering along the horizon, and then he would reach for the rope. The first pull was always gentle, almost reverent. The bell stirred, like a dreamer halfway between worlds. Then it swung, slowly, once, twice, until its note spread wide and deep, flowing like honey through the quiet dot. It reached the shepherd who slept near his flock, reminding him to stir the embers of his fire. It reached the baker's cottage, where a girl named Annalise woke to knead the first loaves of the day. It reached even the forest edge, where foxes paused, ears turning toward that familiar tone. The bell was not just a sound. It was a presence of comfort, woven into the rhythm of life itself. As the village began to wake, soft lights appeared in windows. Doors creaked open, letting out warm air scented with bread and herbs. The world slowly, gracefully unfolded. In Saint Aviel, time was not measured by clocks. There were few of those, and none that anyone trusted more than the bells. The bells divided the day with care. Matins for dawn, prime for the first labor, sext for noon, vespers for evening. The bell told farmers when to lead oxen to the fields, when to rest beneath the willow, when to return home for supper. Even children learned to tell the time by sound the high tone of the morning bell, the deeper hum of the midday, the long, tender notes at dusk that seemed to bless the fields as they faded into shadow in the stillness of dawn. Though it was the first bell that mattered most. It marked not just the beginning of the day, but the rebirth of peace, of gentle certainty. Annalise, the baker's daughter, loved that hour. She would often stand by the small window above the oven, her hands deep in dough, and listen as the echo of the bell drifted away. It felt to her like a song written for the village alone, a melody that had known every birth, every feast, every winter past. Her mother used to tell her, in hushed tones, that bells were alive, that their bronze hearts held the voices of those who cast them. They remember, her mother would say, smiling softly as she shaped a loaf. Every hand that touched them, every prayer whispered near them. They hold the warmth of every soul who ever listened. And perhaps Annalise thought that was why they sounded so comforting. They carried the memory of countless dawns, countless gentle beginnings. By the time the first rays of sunlight touched the rooftops, the whole village was moving in a rhythm as natural as breath. Farmers walked with calm steps toward the fields, baskets in hand. Monks crossed the courtyard in silence, their robes whispering over the flagstones. Carts rolled softly over the dirt path, wheels sighing like gentle waves. Overhead, doves fluttered above the chapel tower, circling lazily before settling on the roof. The bell, now quiet, hung in still reverence, its echoes fading into memory until the next call. Father Ambrose remained in the tower for a while, resting on a wooden bench. He always lingered after the first ringing, not out of duty, but out of gratitude. He would look out over the landscape pastures stretching like quilts of green and gold, smoke rising from chimneys in tender curls, and he would breathe deeply. He often thought that the bell's purpose was not only to tell time, but to remind people to feel time, to notice it passing gently, hour by hour, like light shifting across the floor. When he finally descended the stairs, the day had truly begun. In the quiet hours that followed, Saint Aviel glowed with life, but never haste. The villagers moved slowly, deliberately. There was no rush to the fields, no clatter of urgency. Bells kept their pace gentle, reassuring. If one listened closely, they could hear smaller bells as well, tiny chimes hanging from cottage doors, from the necks of cows, even from the handles of market stalls. The air seemed filled with them, subtle notes of life woven together. Each had its own tone, its own purpose. A small bell over the inn's door rang softly whenever someone entered, greeting every traveler like an old friend. A silver bell by the healer's hut tinkled in the wind, a symbol of welcome and care. It was said that even the river had its bell-tide beneath the old stone bridge, its faint murmur heard only when the water ran high after rain. Children liked to imagine that it called to the fish, or perhaps to the spirits of the water who guarded the mill. As the morning light grew warm and golden, the rhythm of life deepened. The bell that had called the dawn now rested, its voice silent, but its memory still singing in the hearts of all who had heard it. In that era, the gentle, unhurried Middle Ages bells were more than instruments. They were the heartbeat of the day, the measure of faith and of comfort. In their tones lived the certainty that no matter how many seasons passed, some sounds would never fade, and so, even as the sun climbed higher, villagers would still think of that morning note, the first one, the calm one, and feel anchored to something timeless. When noon approached, another bell would call, deeper and slower, like the sigh of the earth itself. But that was still some time away, for now the world of Saint Avile was bathed in gentle light, its people moving like verses in a quiet hymn. The scent of bread and meadow flowers filled the air. Bees hummed. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the faint memory of bronze and devotion. And somewhere, in the heart of the chapel tower, the bell waited still and patient, knowing that soon it would speak again. And so the first bell of dawn had done its work softly, faithfully, and without haste. It had woken not just a village, but the gentle rhythm of life itself. Now, as the story rests for a moment, the air feels calm and full of quiet echoes. We will pause here until you're ready to hear the next bell and the next chapter. Let us drift onward, softly and slowly, as the sun climbs high over the gentle hills. Close your eyes if you wish. Breathe in the hush of the Middle Ages, and let the next bell guide you deeper into calm. Chapter 2, the Bell of Midday. Morning had grown full and golden by the time the next bell prepared to speak. The air above Saint Avile shimmered softly, filled with the scent of ripened grain and the distant hum of bees weaving among meadow blooms. Shadows shortened, gathering under the eaves of cottages and beneath the slow-turning sails of the mill. It was the hour the monks called sext, the middle of the day, when the sun rested at its highest place and all work was meant to pause. The first bell had awakened life. This one would calm it again, folding the hours into stillness. In the tower, Father Ambrose waited. He had already walked the paths between chapel and village, his sandals brushing against grass warmed by sunlight. He had visited the baker, offered blessings to the fields, and shared a cup of thin, fragrant broth with the shepherds near the edge of the wood. Now, as he returned to the bell tower, the world around him seemed to move slower. Even the swallows that darted through the air flew with unhurried grace. He placed his palm against the cool stone of the tower as he climbed. The heat of the day had not reached these walls. Within, it was dim and serene, the air carrying faint traces of incense from morning prayers. When he reached the top, the bronze of the bell glowed like honey in the light streaming through the narrow arches. Dust motes floated lazily around it, moving as if to the rhythm of its memory. Father Ambrose did not ring the bell yet. He liked to wait to feel the moment before sound, the quiet heartbeat of anticipation. To him, this was a sacred silence, one that existed only at the threshold of time. He leaned on the wooden railing, gazing down at the village. He saw Annalie standing in the bakery door, wiping flour from her hands. He saw the blacksmith sitting by his forge, eyes half closed, a cloth over his brow. He saw the old widow, Dame Hild, resting on her stoop, shelling peas into a basket beside her cat. Every one of them, he thought, was guided by the belly chower, not just a measure, but a melody shaping their days. And then, with the softest pull of the rope, the bell began to sway. Its sound rose, low and round, filling the valley like warm water in a bowl. Gong. The note moved gently through the air, neither sharp nor heavy. It rolled down the slopes and over the cottages, through the orchard, past the Abbey walls. The sound of the bell at noon was slower, deeper than the dawn's. It carried the weight of rest. A reminder to breathe, to stop, to remember the sacredness of simplicity. Gong. It washed over the fields, where the farmers laid down their tools and stretched their backs, sighing into the golden air. Gong. It drifted into the bakery, where Annalise wiped her hands and placed the last loaf to cool, her face glowing in the oven's warmth. Gong. It reached the monastery gardens, where monks paused their hoeing and turned their faces to the sky, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. And when the final echo faded, the whole of St. Avielle was still. Midday in the Middle Ages was not an hour of bustle. It was an hour of stillness, of reflection. Even animals seemed to sense it. Birds perched quietly in hedges, their songs muted. Oxen stood in the shade of the oak grove, tails swishing in slow rhythm. Dogs dozed in the doorways of cottages, paws twitching in gentle dreams. It was a time when the world seemed to rest between breaths, poised in perfect balance. In the Abbey refectory, long wooden tables waited in silence. Bowls of soup thick with barley and herbs sent up faint threads of steam. Loaves of bread, still warm, were placed in rows beside clay cups of cool water. The monks entered without speaking. They sat in order, robes brushing the benches softly, their movements unhurried. The only sound was the whisper of fabric and the distant hum of summer air beyond the open door as they ate. One brother read softly from a parchment, his voice measured and calm. He read of the beauty of the earth, of patience, of gratitude. His words mingled with the soft clatter of wooden spoons, forming a rhythm as steady as the tolling of the bell. Father Ambrose listened, his hands folded, eyes half closed. The words did not matter as much as their tone, the gentle rise and fall that seemed to cradle the heart in peace. Outside, the village mirrored that same serenity. Families gathered under trees, breaking their bread together. Children lay in the grass, tracing clouds that drifted lazily across the blue. The bell's resonance seemed to linger in the air long after it stopped ringing. It was as if the whole valley had inhaled deeply and chosen not to exhale just yet. Annelise's younger brother, Thomas, lay on his back beside the bakery garden. The tall stalks of rosemary and thyme swayed around him, and the smell of bread mixed with the scent of herbs and beeswax. He could still feel the bell's vibration in his chest, like a gentle hum beneath his ribs. He wondered, as children do, how far the bell's voice could travel. Could it reach the distant hills beyond the forest? Could it brush the tops of the clouds? Could it be heard by angels? He smiled to himself, letting the thought drift like a feather, and soon his eyes grew heavy. In those days, bells were not merely heard, they were felt. Their sound carried through walls and bones alike, a shared heartbeat of community. Bells told people when to pray, when to work, when to rest, when to love. They marked weddings and harvests. They tolled gently for the departed. They signaled rain, feasts, and blessings. At noon, their message was always the same. Pause. Let the world be quiet. Let the heart remember stillness. And so, while the world beyond St. Aviel might have been filled with kings and crusades and merchants hurrying between cities, here, in this peaceful valley, time itself moved at the speed of breath. As the heat of the day softened, a small breeze drifted down from the northern ridge. It moved through the wheat fields like a sigh, brushing the surface into ripples of gold. Somewhere, a single skylark began to sing, again hesitant at first, then full and bright, as though the bell had given it permission, in the shade beside the chapel. Father Ambrose sat on the bench where the novices often studied their psalms. He looked out across the village and felt the familiar peace that came after Sext, the kind that felt eternal. Suspended, untouched by age, he often thought that if someone could listen long enough, they would realize that bells did not only divide time, they united it. Each sound carried every sound before it, each echo a link in an endless chain of calm. He smiled faintly, fingers tracing the edge of his rosary, and whispered a small prayer not for guidance, but for gratitude. Gratitude for sound, gratitude for silence, gratitude for the breath between them. By the time the villagers began to stir again, the shadows had grown a little longer. The bell's echo was gone, but its peace lingered like a soft fragrance. Children fetched water from the well. The blacksmith returned to his forge, though he struck the iron with slower, gentler rhythm. In the fields, laughter began, again quiet, distant, blending with the hum of insects. St. Aviel's heart beat once more. Steady as the turning of the earth, the bell tower watched over it all. The bronze still glimmered in the sunlight, now mellowed to amber, and though it was silent, it seemed almost alive, as if the air around it still trembled with memory. Father Ambrose would not ring it again until evening, when the sky blushed and cooled. For now, he simply sat by its side, his eyes half closed, listening to the hush that followed the sound. He knew that peace was not only found in prayer or song, but in rhythm, in knowing when to stop, when to wait, when to breathe. The bell had taught him that, and through it, he had learned that even the passage of time could be gentle. The hours drifted on, golden and slow. The world turned softly toward afternoon, and the bell, that patient keeper of peace, waited for dusk, for its next moment to breathe life into the stillness of the world. And so the second bell, the bell of midday, had done its work. It had stilled the hands of the busy, quieted the heart, and filled the air with rest. We will leave St. Aviel in its warm afternoon light now, until you're ready to listen to the next bell and the next hour of peace. Let us return now, ever so softly, to St. Aviel. The sun begins its slow descent, and a hush falls over the fields. Let the rhythm of this next bell guide your thoughts, like drifting petals on a calm stream. Chapter 3. The bell at dusk the afternoon had ripened into gold. Shadows lengthened gently over the meadows, and the air grew tender, touched with the scent of cooling earth and woodsman. Beyond the orchard walls, The low hum of bees faded as they turned toward their hives, and the birds' songs softened into quiet conversation. It was the hour when the world itself seemed to sigh neither day nor night, but something suspended between Dot in Saint Aviel. People called this hour Vespers. The monks named it the prayer of evening. The villagers, more simply, called it the time of rest. It was when doors began to close softly, when fires were kindled anew, and when the great bell, waiting all day in stillness, prepared once more to speak high in the tower. Father Ambrose sat for a long while before touching the rope. The sun lay low behind the hills, painting the windows in amber and rose. Dust drifted in the beams like fragments of memory. He could hear faint sounds from below, the laughter of children playing at the edge of the square, the creak of a cartwheel, the distant murmur of a woman singing to her baby. All these sounds folded together into a single breath of evening. He leaned upon the stone ledge and looked across the valley. Fields shimmered like silk beneath the light. The river, silver and slow, wound between them, catching the last of the sun. Smoke curled from chimneys in thin, wandering ribbons. Far away, a cowbell tinkled a soft companion to the bell that would soon join it. When he finally drew the rope, it was with the gentlest motion, as though he feared to wake the world too suddenly. The bell stirred once, then twice, and began its slow, deep song, Gong. The first tone rolled outward, low as the breath of the earth, Gong. The second followed, lingering longer, drifting through the streets like incense, Gong. Each note seemed to land upon every rooftop, every heart, blessing the end of labor, welcoming rest in the baker's cottage. Annalise brushed flour from her arms and watched the orange light settle on the loaves cooling by the window. The bell's echo touched her gently, and she smiled. She thought of her father closing the shutters, of her brother chasing the last chicken back into its coop. The sound meant the same thing every evening. Enough work, enough striving, enough noise. The day had been good, and that was all. She lit a small candle and placed it beside the bread. The flame bent slightly in the hush, golden as honey, steady as her heartbeat. Outside, the bell continued to sing. Across the village, others listened to. The shepherds, returning from the high pasture, paused at the gate, resting their staffs on their shoulders. The blacksmith quenched his forge and watched the steam rise like ghosts into the deepening sky. Even the river seemed to slow its whisper to match the rhythm of bronze and evening wind. Children ran through the square, their laughter fading as the bell grew softer. They knew its meaning without words. When the bell at dusk sounded, play was done. They would wash their hands, say their prayers, and climb beneath their quilts before the last glow left the window panes. In the monastery, the brothers gathered in the choir. The air inside was cool, filled with the faint sweetness of wax and lavender oil. As the bell's final tone faded into silence, their voices rose a gentle, melodic chant that wound upward like smoke. The words were ancient, but the feeling was simple. Gratitude, peace, release. Father Ambrose joined them quietly, his steps slow, his robe brushing the stone floor. He loved this part of the day most, the mingling of the bell's echo and the human voice, sound meeting silence, earth meeting sky. Together they seemed to hold the world steady. When the singing ended, the brothers remained still, each lost in his own prayer. Outside, twilight deepened, tinting the windows violet. The first stars appeared above the western hills. Later, as the monks dispersed, Father Ambrose returned to the tower door and looked out once more. The fields were dim now, washed in a faint silver haze. Lamps glowed in cottage windows, small and steady as fireflies. Somewhere in the distance, a nightjar began its slow, lilting call. He thought of how every sound had its hour. The birds for morning, the hammer for noon, the crickets for night, and the bell, eternal among them all. Its voice was the thread that tied each sound to the next, weaving day into night, wakefulness into rest. He sat upon the stone step, feeling the coolness beneath his palms, and watched as the stars grew brighter. The air smelled faintly of rain far away, though no clouds showed yet. He found comfort in the way the sky changed without haste, each color folding gently into another dot down in the village. Annelise's family shared their evening meal, simple soup, bread, and a bit of cheese. They ate slowly, speaking little. The bells' sound still lingered in their minds, soft as the echo of waves on a quiet shore. When the last spoon was set down, her mother gathered the dishes, and her father murmured a small blessing for the night. Tomas, sleepy from the long day, leaned against the window ledge. He could see the tower through the fading light, a dark silhouette against the sky. "Will Father Ambrose ring it again before we sleep?" He asked. "Only once more," his mother said, "a smaller bell, to whisper to the night itself." Tomas smiled and yawned, content with that thought. Outside, a faint breeze brushed the ivy on the wall, and the candlelight flickered across his face. As dusk deepened into evening, the world of Saint Aviel grew quieter still. The streets emptied. The sounds of work and play retreated behind closed shutters. Crickets began their patient song. Somewhere a dog barked once, softly, and then settled down beside the hearth. The great bell, now silent, seemed to sleep. But its silence was not emptiness. It was presence, patient and full. The people of the village carried its peace within them as they moved through the gentle routines of nightfall. Water was poured into basins. Coals were banked. Lamps were dimmed. The rhythm of the bell had become the rhythm of their hearts. Far above, the sky turned the color of deep velvet. The last glimmer of daylight rested upon the horizon like a final sigh, and then, as if to bless the world one more time before darkness claimed it, Father Ambrose reached for the smaller rope beside the great one. A lighter bell hung their companion, clear and tender. When it rang, its tone was not commanding, not solemn. It was like a whisper, a mother's voice calling her children to rest. Ting, ting, ting. 3 small notes drifted through the night air, each one softer than the last, until they melted into the rustle of leaves and the song of the crickets. It was the bell of peace, rung every night after vespers, a signal that all was well, that the village slept safely beneath the eyes of heaven in their beds. Children stirred and smiled. The baker's hearth glowed low, painting a soft circle of light upon the floor. In the Abbey, candles burned down to their ends, leaving threads of smoke that curled toward the rafters. And in the tower, Father Ambrose sat alone for a moment longer, listening. He could no longer tell where the bell's echo ended and the night began. They seemed the same 2 voices joined in eternal stillness. He closed his eyes, folded his hands, and whispered to the darkness, "Rest now, my children of the bell. Rest, and let the silence keep you." Outside, the moon climbed, slow and bright. It washed the valley in silver, turning the river to glass. The world breathed evenly again, and if one listened carefully, past the crickets and the soft sighing of trees, one might still hear a faint hum, the memory of bronze, of hands pulling rope, of time itself moving gently forward. Saint Aviel slept, and the bell slept with it. Until morning, neither would stir. And so the bell at dusk completed its tender work-drawing day to a close, folding the world into stillness, and reminding every heart that peace is the truest sound of all. Now let the quiet linger. The stars are bright, the air cool and kind. When you are ready, we shall listen together for the next bell. The bell of midnight, waiting far beyond the horizon of dreams. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the world grow quiet around you as the story returns to Saint Aviel, where the stars now hang like candles in an endless hall of sky. Listen for the Midnight Bell, Chapter 4. The bell at midnight night had settled fully upon the valley, soft as velvet, deep as breath. Every roof in Saint Aviel wore a shimmer of moonlight, and every window glowed faintly with the last sighs of candle flame. The wind had gone still, as if even the air were listening to the silence. It was the quietest hour, the one between yesterday and tomorrow, when the world seemed to pause and float, suspended on its own heartbeat, far above the sleeping village. In the chapel tower, the great bell waited. By day it shone with bronze light, but now it was only shadow and silver. A thin band of moonlight slipped through the arched window and touched its curved side, tracing the faint scars of age. It had watched centuries pass from this perch, had sung for births and harvests and countless dusks. And now, as always, it waited for the moment to mark midnight, the hour of contemplation. Father Ambrose had not slept. He rarely did on nights like this, when the sky was so clear that even the mountains could be seen faintly in the distance. He climbed the tower stairs slowly, lantern in hand, each step echoing in the spiral like a soft drumbeat. The stones were cool under his sandals, and the air smelled faintly of oil and iron. Halfway up, he paused, breathing deeply. He could hear the faint murmur of the river beyond the walls, the occasional hoot of an owl. It felt as though the entire world had curled itself into slumber, leaving only him and the stars awake. When he reached the top, he set down his lantern and opened the narrow shutter. A stream of cold night air entered, carrying the scent of pine and smoke and the faint sweetness of wild mint from the fields below. He gazed at the moon. It hung low, large and round, and its light spilled across the valley like water. The fields gleamed. The rooftops glittered. Even the worn stones of the Abbey shone faintly, touched by silver grace. He bowed his head and whispered a prayer that was older than any he had learned, a prayer of stillness, of simply being. Then, gently, he took the rope in his hand. The first note of the midnight bell did not break. The silence it became part of it. Gong. The tone was long and deep, like the breath of the sky itself. It rolled outward, slow and heavy, gliding over the rooftops, over the dark orchards, down into the sleeping meadows, gone. The second followed, softer, the echo melting into the sound of the river gong. The third seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the ground, from the air, from the heart. The bell of midnight was never loud. It was measured, deliberate, kind. It called not to the waking world, but to the soul, the part of every person that listened even in dreams. In their cottages, the villagers slept peacefully. The bell's sound drifted through open shutters, mingling with the rhythm of breath and the rustle of straw. For some, it entered their dreams as distant music. For others, it was a mother's voice, or the whisper of the wind in summer fields. It soothed, not startled. It reminded each heart, even in sleep, that it was watched over. That time still moved gently through the dark dot in the baker's house. Annalise turned in her bed, the linen cool against her cheek. She half heard the bell and smiled without waking, her mind floating in a soft dream of wheat fields and golden morning. The bell's tone became part of her breathing, slow and even. Somewhere downstairs, the embers of the hearth glowed faintly. A heartbeat of light in the hushed dot within the monastery. The brothers stirred in their cells. The rule commanded prayer at midnight, but the prayers were never rushed. Each monk rose in silence, wrapped his cloak about his shoulders, and moved through the corridor with steps as light as mist. They gathered in the chapel, where candles already flickered, and bowed as the bell continued its slow, even song. The chant that followed was not loud enough to wake even the birds. It was more a murmur, a river of voices, deep and low, flowing beneath the arches. Words dissolved into pure tone. The monks sang of peace and of the turning of time, of the mystery of darkness and dawn. Each note met the bell's fading hum and disappeared into the air, as though carried upward to the stars. Father Ambrose listened, his eyes half closed. To him, the midnight service was not about words, but about presence. The stillness between the bell's strokes was prayer enough. He thought of the villagers below, of their quiet houses and the steady rhythm of their dreams. He thought of the fields resting after harvest, of the river sliding past the bridge with its hidden bell, whispering endlessly. Everything, he felt, was part of one great silence, live, breathing, infinite. When the chant ended, the monks remained seated in the candlelight. No one hurried to leave. A few heads nodded gently, sleep returning like a tide. The air was warm with wax and breath. Outside, the bell had gone quiet, yet its echo still seemed to live in the stone walls. Father Ambrose stepped to the door and opened it wide. Cool air drifted in, and the candles wavered. He looked out into the night once more. The sky was wide, the stars countless. In that moment, he thought of how time itself was like the bell's ring, expanding, softening, fading, yet never truly gone. He smiled, closed the door, and let the monks return to their dreams. Down in the village, the silence deepened again. The owl had gone quiet. The river's murmur was steady and low. The world seemed held together by the memory of bronze. The little silver bell beneath the bridge chimed once as the current brushed it, a tiny echo of the great bell above, as though the earth were answering heaven in secret. A fox moved through the grass, pausing to look toward the tower before vanishing into the trees. Even its paws made no sound. Father Ambrose did not descend the tower right away. He liked to wait after midnight, to sit on the narrow bench beside the great bell and listen to what came after sound, the gentle ringing that only the soul could hear. It was said among old bell ringers that if you sat still long enough, the bell would sing to you without being touched. He had learned that this was true, not with the ears, but with the heart. He closed his eyes. The night breathed. He felt the air against his skin, cool and kind. He felt the slow pulse of his own blood, in time with the invisible echo of the bell. And beneath it all, he felt peace the kind that has no beginning and no end. At last, he rose, took his lantern, and descended the steps. The stones were cold, and his shadow moved gently along the wall. When he reached the chapel floor, he paused and looked toward the altar. A single candle still burned there, its flame steady. He bowed his head once more, then crossed the courtyard. The night wrapped around him like a cloak. The grass was wet with dew. Each step released a faint scent of mint and soil. As he walked toward his cell, the first faint line of grey appeared along the farthest edge of the horizon. Not dawn yet, but a promise. The cycle would continue. The bells would keep time. Life would unfold as gently as always. Back in his narrow room, Father Ambrose placed the lantern beside his bed and opened the small window. The air that came through was cool and fragrant and far away. He thought he could still hear the last echo of the bell mingling with the whisper of water. He smiled, murmured a blessing, and lay down. Sleep came to him as softly as a fold of cloth, and so Saint Aviel slept through the last hours of night. The bell tower stood watch, silent and patient, a guardian of time. Stars drifted westward. The moon sank low. Soon the faintest birdsong would stir, and Father Ambrose would wake again to greet the pale blush of morning. But for now, everything was still. The bells had spoken. The world rested in their echo. Thus the bell at midnight fulfilled its quiet duty, not to awaken, but to cradle, to remind every dreaming heart that peace moves through even the deepest dark. Please find somewhere quiet, breathe softly, and let Saint Aviel wake once more. The next bell awaits. Chapter 5. The bell of morning prayer the night had thinned, drawn gently toward morning, and the world began to stir again, though not with sound, not yet. It began with the faintest change in the light, a silver glow along the rim of the hills. The stars softened, their edges dimmed, and the moon, pale as a memory, drifted westward into mist. The air held that cool stillness that exists only before dawn, as if the world were holding its breath, waiting for the first whisper of day. In the tower of St. Aviel's chapel, the great bell slept in silence. Its bronze body was dark, a shape cut out of the grey heart. But soon it would wake again, this time not to summon the living from sleep, nor to mark the labor of day, but to invite hearts to stillness and gratitude. For the monks of the Abbey, this hour was Lord's the prayer of morning. For the villagers, it was simply the beginning again, the soft turning of the wheel that never ceased. Father Ambrose rose long before the rest. He had slept only a few hours, yet he did not feel weary. Sleep came to him as it came to the land, brief, sufficient, deep. When he opened his eyes, a faint line of light lay across his wall, shifting as the candle beside his bed guttered out. He sat for a moment, breathing in the scent of stone and wax and cool air. Then, dressed in his robe, tied his corded belt, and stepped out into the courtyard. The air outside was damp and sweet. Dew glistened on the grass like powdered glass, and a thin mist curled around the chapel steps. The sky above him was pearl grey, not yet touched by colour, and the first small bird had begun to sing a single note, tentative, like a question offered to the dawn. Father Ambrose smiled. He knew that note well. He had heard it for more years than he could count. The robin always sang first, then the sparrows, then the finches, until the valley was filled with soft music. But not yet. For now, only the robin, only the first voice in the chorus of morning. He climbed the tower steps, lantern in hand, its light trembling along the stone walls. As he rose, he whispered the words of the morning psalm words, so familiar that they had become the rhythm of his breath. Each syllable matched a step. By the time he reached the top, the last line had melted into silence. He set the lantern down beside the bell and looked out through the arched window. Below, St. Aviel still slept. The roofs were grey with dew. No smoke yet rose from the chimneys, and the river, faintly visible through the mist, lay still as glass. The world, he thought, was waiting to be born again. He always hesitated before that first pull on the rope. There was something sacred about this moment, the space between silence and sound. It felt as though all creation leaned toward it, ready to awaken. He closed his eyes and breathed once more. Then, gently, he drew down the rope. The first note of the morning bell did not break the silence. It shaped it gone. The tone spread wide and low, filling the mist with resonance. It seemed to come not from metal, but from the sky itself, as if the air had found its own voice. The sound moved slowly over the sleeping village, touching each rooftop, each field, each quiet heart. Gong. The second tone followed, rising a little, shimmering like a ripple across still water. Gong. The third note lingered, long and deep, before fading into the hum of the dawn. The rhythm of the bell at Lord's was slower, gentler than the dawn bell that had called the people to work. This was not a summons, but a blessing. It asked nothing. It only offered peace. In their cells, the monks stirred. Bare feet touched cold stone. Robes were gathered, candles lit. No one spoke. Words were not needed. They moved like shadows through the cloisters, the soft rustle of cloth joining the faint ringing that drifted from the tower. The bell was their clock, their heartbeat, their teacher. It told them not only when to pray, but how slowly, evenly, with care. The chapel doors opened, and a stream of warm light poured into the mist. Inside, the air glowed with candle flame and smelled faintly of wax and frankincense. As the monks took their places, the last note of the bell faded, and Father Ambrose's voice rose, soft and low. O dawn, child of night, bearer of light, we thank thee for the turning of time, for rest that has ended, for day that begins. The chant that followed moved like a tide steady, never hurried. It echoed the rhythm of the bell itself. Slow exhalation, long pause, soft return. The sound filled the chapel, flowed through the open doors, and mingled with the mist outside, down in the village. The bell's tones reached the cottages one by one. Annalise, half awake, heard them through her shuttered window. She smiled before her eyes even opened. The world was gentle again. The bell meant safety. It meant the day had begun, but that there was no need to rush. She lay still for a few breaths longer, listening to the last faint vibration, then rose and wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. In the baker's hearth, the embers from the night before still glowed faintly red. She added a few pieces of wood and blew softly until the fire stirred. Soon, The first scent of warmth filled the little room. Outside, a rooster called, its voice half swallowed by fog. The bell had woken not only the people, but the rhythm of the village itself. As the light grew stronger, the mist began to lift. The first color returned to the world. Faint gold along the horizon, blush upon the clouds, soft green upon the meadows. The river caught the light and glittered like spun glass. A breeze moved through the trees, shaking loose droplets of dew that fell like tiny jewels to the earth. By the time the monks finished their prayers, Saint Aviel was awake once more. Doors opened. Chickens clucked in the courtyards. The blacksmith, stretching, stepped into the square. And from the bakery came the smell of dough and yeast, mixing with the cool air. The bell had done its work. It had bridged the dark and the light, dream and day, silence and sound. Father Ambrose remained in the chapel a while after the prayers were done. He sat upon the wooden bench near the altar, eyes closed, hands resting upon his knees. He listened not to sound, but to its absence the echo that remained behind all things. He thought of the first bell he had ever heard. Many years ago, when he was a boy no older than Tomas. It had been a small church. A tiny bronze bell hung from a crooked beam. He could still remember how it had sounded across the fields, how it had made him feel both small and infinite at once. He had not known then what time or prayer meant. He had only known that the bell made the world seem whole. Now, as an old man, he understood that this was its truest gift. It called the scattered pieces of life back together. It did not merely count the hours it gathered them, wove them, sanctified them. As the sun rose higher, he stepped outside. The mist had burned away, leaving the air clear and bright. The chapel tower cast a long shadow across the courtyard, and swallows darted through it, wings flashing in the light. From the village came the sound of morning, footsteps on gravel, laughter, the clatter of buckets, a door creaking open. It was not noise. It was harmony. He smiled and raised his face to the sky. The warmth of the sun touched his brow, and for a moment he closed his eyes and simply stood, letting the world move around him. Every sound, every breath, every flutter of wings seemed to belong to the same great rhythm that began and ended with the bell later. When he walked down to the village, people greeted him softly, always softly, for it felt wrong to break the morning calm. He blessed them each with a nod. Children waved shyly from doorways. Annalise offered him a small loaf, still warm from the oven, its crust glowing gold in the sun. He accepted it with gratitude and placed it in his satchel beside the rosary he always carried. The bell tower loomed behind them, its silhouette against the brightening sky. Every person who passed looked at it briefly, not out of habit, but reverence. It was not merely part of their landscape. It was part of their hearts. As the hours drifted toward midday once more, the rhythm of life deepened again. The sun climbed, the fields glittered, the wheel turned. But even in the noise of work and movement, the morning bell's peace remained. It lingered in the air, in the way people spoke softly to one another, in the gentle patience of their tasks. For Father Ambrose, that was the true miracle of the bells, not the sound itself, but what lingered after. Each ring faded into stillness, yet its peace endured, carried invisibly in every hand, every breath, every moment. By afternoon, he would rest again. By evening, he would rise once more to pull the rope at vespers. And when night returned, the bell would sleep with him, its silent heart waiting for dawn. But for now, Saint Aviel glowed with light. The world was whole, and the bell had reminded it how to be. Thus the bell of morning prayer fulfilled its gentle duty to wake not only the body, but the spirit, to draw life from the quiet dark into the golden calm of day. The air turns golden with ripened fields, and the rhythm of life is guided once again by the patient, unhurried voice of the bell. Chapter 6. The bell of the harvest day. The summer had been long and kind, and now the earth had ripened under a gentler sun. Everywhere around St. Aviel, the fields glowed the color of honey. The wheat swayed in quiet waves, heavy-headed and ready, and the orchards hung low with fruit. The air itself seemed full, round, complete, carrying the scent of cut grass and the faint sweetness of cider, pressed in the cool barns near the river. It was the season of gathering, and the bell of the harvest was its faithful heart. For generations, its sound had marked not the passing of hours, but the rhythm of gratitude. Each ring was a blessing laid upon the work of hands and soil, reminding all who heard it that labor, when done with love, was holy. Father Ambrose had watched the change of season with quiet joy. He had seen it many times before, yet each year felt new. From the tower, he had watched the first green shoot push through the spring earth. He had heard the summer winds move through the barley like a distant hymn. Now, as the mornings grew cooler and the evenings shorter, he felt again the tender sadness and peace that came with harvest, the knowing that all cycles must turn. This morning, the world seemed to hold its breath. Mist lingered over the valley, softening every edge, and dew clung to the cobblestones like tiny mirrors of light. The first faint hum of voices drifted upward from the fields, where farmers were already gathering, their scythes glinting in the grey dot. Father Ambrose climbed the spiral steps to the bell tower, lantern in hand. His breath formed pale clouds in the air, and his sandals made soft sounds on the worn stones. He paused halfway, as he always did, to listen the faint bleating of sheep in the hills, the creak of wagon wheels, the rhythmic swish of blades through wheat. Even before the bell, the day already carried its own quiet song. At the top, he opened the narrow window. The mist rolled in, cool and sweet, wrapping around the great bronze bell like a cloak. He reached out and touched its side. The metal felt smooth and alive, faintly warm from the memory of yesterday's sun. He whispered a small prayer word, simple and familiar, then drew the rope once. Gently dot the first note of the harvest bell rose into the grey morning like breath meeting sky. It was a deep, rounded sound, full but never heavy. It carried across the valley and settled upon the fields like sunlight spreading through cloud. Farmers straightened their backs when they heard it, eyes closing for a moment in quiet acknowledgement. Gong. The bell rolled through the mist, reaching the barns, the orchards, the cottages. It touched the river and crossed it, echoing faintly against the forest hills beyond. Gong. The second tone followed, lingering like a benediction. Gong. And then the sound melted into the rhythm of work, the sigh of scythes, the rustle of sheaves, the murmurs of voices giving thanks without words. In the fields, Annalise worked beside her father and brother. The golden stalks brushed their knees, and the air shimmered with the faint dust of chaff. Every so often they paused to listen, their faces softened by the light. "Father Ambrose has rung the harvest bell," said Tomas, leaning on his scythe. His father nodded. "Then the day is blessed. Let us work slowly as the bell sounds." And so they did not in haste, but in rhythm. The swing of the blade, the gathering of sheaves, the tying of bundles, each motion flowed into the next like lines of a prayer. The bell had set the tempo, and the valley followed by mid-morning. The mist had lifted completely. The sky spread clear and pale blue above them, and the sun poured down in golden sheets. Bees moved lazily from flower to flower at the edge of the fields. Somewhere a lark sang a thin, spiraling song that rose higher than the sound of scythes or laughter. Near the river, the younger villagers worked with baskets, collecting apples that had fallen overnight. The fruit gleamed like polished amber, their skins cool to the touch. Every so often, someone would pause, brush a hand across a brow, and gaze toward the bell tower standing high on its hill. They could see it even from here, the dark silhouette of Father Ambrose, steady at the rope. When the bell moved, it caught the sunlight for an instant, like a star reborn. Somewhere in the village square, the old widow Hild set out a table with bread and cider. She could no longer work the fields, but her hands were still strong for kneading, and she baked each loaf with care. When the workers returned at noon, she would feed them, and together they would sit beneath the elms, the bell's voice still echoing faintly in their bones. At midday, the bell rang again, lower, now slower. The tones fell through the bright air like soft waves. Gong, rest, gong, give thanks, gong. All things are enough. The villagers gathered in small groups beneath trees, spreading simple meals upon cloths, bread, cheese, apples, a jug of cool water. No one spoke loudly. The only sounds were the creak of branches, the gentle laughter of children, the rustle of wind moving through ripe stalks. For a moment, even the tools seemed to sleep. Father Ambrose came down from the tower and joined them. He walked slowly through the fields, offering blessings not with words but with presence, his quiet smile, his nods, his stillness. The people loved him not for sermons, but for the way he listened. When he stood beside them, time seemed to move more slowly, as if the world itself had chosen to rest. He ate a small piece of bread, drank from a clay cup, and looked across the valley. Everywhere he saw peace, workers beneath the trees, sunlight upon the river, the bell tower standing patient and watchful. "It is enough," he murmured, half to himself. "It is always enough." By late afternoon, the shadows had lengthened. The piles of harvested grain stood tall, bound in neat rows that caught the light and shimmered like small fires in the field. Laughter drifted from the orchard where children played among fallen apples, their hands sticky with juice. The world smelled of hay, warm earth, and sweetness. The bell rang once more 3 calm strokes to mark the day's closing work. Its echoes rolled gently across the valley, mingling with birdsong and the sigh of wind. The rhythm of sides slowed, then ceased. The people stood and stretched, their faces golden with dust and light. Annalise turned toward the bell tower and pressed her hands together, not as a gesture of worship, but of gratitude. "Listen," she whispered to her brother. "It sounds like the sun itself." Tomas nodded sleepily, his face glowing. "It sounds like home." As dusk began to fall, Father Ambrose climbed the tower for the last time that day. The sky had turned the color of soft peach, deepening to lavender above the hills. A cool breeze stirred the flags that hung from the Abbey walls. Below him, the valley glowed gold fading into blue, smoke curling from the cottages where suppers were being prepared. He pulled the rope gently, not to call anyone now, but to bless. The bell of thanks, they called it. Its notes were soft, rounded by twilight. Each one drifted far across the fields and was caught by the trees, the barns, the water. He thought of all who had worked today, the young and the old, the strong and the frail. He thought of how their hands had moved in harmony, how the earth had answered them with fruit and grain. And he thought of how the bell had guided them, not as a master commands, but as a friend walks beside. The sound grew slower, fainter. The air thickened with shadow and warmth. When the final tone faded, he stood a moment longer, watching as stars began to appear above the dark hills. Down in the square, the villagers gathered once more. Torches flickered, and the smell of roasted barley filled the air. Old songs were sung, quiet ones, songs of gratitude that spoke of rain and sunlight, of hands and hearts, of seasons that turn and return again. The bell tower stood silent among them, but its spirit seemed to sing along, its bronze heart still resonant with the memory of the day. Children fell asleep against their mothers' skirts. The men spoke softly, their voices weaving with the chirp of crickets. Even the animals seemed gentler, the dogs lying by the fire, the horses breathing slow and steady near the fence. It was said in St. Aviel that during harvest, the bell's tone never truly ceased. Even when the air was still, the earth kept humming with its rhythm. Some claimed to hear it in the rustle of straw, others in the murmuring of the stream. Father Ambrose believed it was in the blood, the pulse that joined all living things in one quiet harmony. When the villagers finally drifted home, the square emptied, the fires sank to embers. Above, the moon rose round and soft, haloed by a faint mist. Father Ambrose stood at the chapel door, his hands folded. He watched the last lanterns move along the path like fireflies returning to the night. Behind him, the bell tower loomed, quiet and still, its shadow stretching across the courtyard like the fold of an angel's wing. He whispered, "Rest now, children of the harvest. The bell will guard your dreams." Then he entered his cell, closed the wooden door, and sat by the window. Outside, the valley shimmered beneath the moon, peaceful and complete. He could almost hear the echo of the day's final ringer tone, so soft that only the heart could catch it. It was enough, and so the bell of the harvest day fulfilled its gentle purpose to weave labor into peace, to teach that every task can be holy, and to remind all who hear it that gratitude is the quietest, truest sound of all. We return once more to St. Aviel, now wrapped in the quiet hush of winter. The fields rest, the sky lies low and grey, and the bell waits to speak again. Chapter 7. The Bell of Winters. Eve the first frost had come quietly in the night. When morning broke, the valley lay beneath a thin veil of silver. Every blade of grass was tipped with crystal, every branch traced in white. The air held that peculiar stillness that comes only with cold, clear, weightless, almost musical in its silence. The sound of footsteps on the cobbles rang brighter, more delicate, as if even the ground was singing softly beneath the frost dot in Saint Aviel. Smoke already curled from the chimneys. The season of harvest songs had faded, and the time of hearthlight and stillness had begun. The villagers moved more slowly now, wrapped in wool and memory. Each day was shorter, gentler. Each night arrived earlier, bringing its long hours of quiet. And through it all, the bell kept watch, its bronze heart steady against the wind, its tone carrying warmth through the cold air like a single flame that refused to go out. Father Ambrose loved this season most of all. The world, he often said, had grown contemplative. The earth itself seemed to pray. He rose before dawn, as always, lighting a small candle in his cell and cupping his hands around it to feel the first bloom of heat. The walls shimmered faintly with its light, and he breathed in the faint scent of wax and tallow. Outside, snow began to fall slow, wide flakes that drifted in a pattern so calm they seemed to hesitate before landing. Each one touched the ground soundlessly, and together they made a kind of hush, deeper than any silence he had known in summer. He took his lantern and climbed the tower. The steps were colder now, rimed with ice near the windows. His breath clouded before him, and when he reached the top, he paused to rub his hands together before drawing the small curtain aside. The world beyond the tower window glowed white. Roofs wore soft caps of snow, and the river had slowed to a glassy crawl. He could see faint lanterns moving below villagers, heading to the chapel for the vigil of Winter's Eve. Cloaks pulled close, their footsteps muffled. He smiled, touched the rope, and whispered the old prayer. May warmth dwell where cold would rule, and may sound awaken peace, not fear. Then he pulled. The first note of the bell of Winter's Eve rang out, low and round. It rolled through the snow-heavy air, deep but not loud, its tone softened by the drifting flakes. Gong. The sound floated over the valley like breath over glass, echoing from hill to hill before melting into silence. Gong. The second note followed, slower still, and every window seemed to glow a little brighter in answer. Gong. By the third tone, the village had stopped moving. People lifted their heads. Children paused mid-step. It was as if the whole world were listening, not just with ears, but with hearts. The bell called them not to labor, not to prayer of duty, but to gather in the quiet celebration of warmth against cold, of company against solitude. In its deep voice was the promise of firelight, of laughter in hushed rooms, of bread shared and candles lit. Inside the chapel, candles lined the altar like a constellation of gold. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and pine. Branches of evergreen hung from the rafters, their tips dusted with frost. The villagers filled the pews slowly, shaking snow from their cloaks, their breath mingling in faint clouds that shimmered in the light. Annalise sat near the front, her shawl drawn around her shoulders. Beside her, her brother Thomas clutched a small bell of his own silver charm Father Ambrose had given him after the harvest. He held it tight, smiling every time it gave the faintest chime. When Father Ambrose descended from the tower and entered the chapel, the congregation turned their eyes toward him, not in reverence, but in affection. He nodded once, moved to the altar, and raised his hands. "The earth rests," he said softly, his voice barely more than the flicker of a flame. "Let us rest with it." The service that followed was slow and tender. There was no sermon, only song, the old hymn of Winter's Eve, sung in tones that drifted like smoke. Sleep now, fields and rivers wide, beneath the frost, your treasures hide. Till springtime bells shall wake the seed. Rest gently now, the earth has peace indeed. Their voices filled the chapel like warm water filling a cup. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and through the open door one could see the bell tower standing tall against the pale sky. Silent now, but glowing faintly where candlelight touched its bronze. After the service, the villagers did not rush away. Winter had a way of teaching patience. They lingered, speaking in low tones, sharing bits of bread, refilling each other's mugs from steaming kettles. Children sat near the fire, their faces rosy, eyes half closed. Father Ambrose walked among them, blessing none formally, but all quietly. He would place a hand upon a shoulder or smile at a child, and that alone was enough. The bell had already done the true blessing. It had reminded everyone to slow, to be gentle, to find warmth in togetherness. When the last of the villagers left, he stood at the chapel door for a long while, watching them vanish into the snowy dark. Lanterns bobbed down the lane like drifting stars. From somewhere across the square came the muffled sound of laughter, soft, kind, and fleeting. He looked up at the tower and saw a faint glow where the moonlight touched the bell. "Thank you," he murmured to it, as though it were an old friend. "You have sung well tonight." Later, when all the doors were closed and only the wind remained, he climbed the tower once more. The air was sharp now, but clear, and the stars had come out in full thousands of them, glittering like frost scattered through eternity. He pulled his cloak tighter and sat on the bench beside the bell. From here, the world looked at peace. The snow had covered every track, every mark of labor. Even the river seemed to sleep beneath its thin sheet of ice. He thought of time, the seasons, the hours, the years. The bell had marked them all, each tone a petal on the endless bloom of life. He thought of how many times it had rung since he first came here, for births and vows, for harvest and mourning, for peace and prayer. Yet no sound, he felt, was as holy as the one that came in winter the slow, tender chime that wrapped the cold world in warmth. He reached out and touched the rim of the bell. It felt cold, but alive. "You and I," he whispered, "we keep the rhythm together." The night deepened. The snow fell slower now, flakes drifting like drowsy stars. The village below lay silent. Through the small windows, faint orange light glowed in the hearths. The bell tower stood like a guardian, patient and eternal. Father Ambrose pulled the rope once more, just once. A single note rolled out into the stillness, soft as a sigh gone. It traveled down through the valley, across the frozen river, through the sleeping woods. It touched every rooftop, every branch, every heart. And as it faded, the world seemed to exhale one long, peaceful breath. Inside their cottage, Annalise and Tomas heard it. They sat beside the hearth, their faces lit by the fire's amber glow. Their mother dozed in a chair. Their father mended a bit of harness by lamplight. "That's the last bell of the year," Annalise whispered. Tomas looked up from his silver charm and smiled. "Then the year is asleep now." She nodded, and the two of them leaned closer to the warmth, listening as the echo faded into the hush of falling snow. Outside, the wind moved gently around the house, brushing the shutters like a careful hand. When the last ember in the hearth turned to ash, Saint Aviel slept. The bell tower loomed against the starlit sky, its shape soft under the drifting snow. Inside, Father Ambrose rested on the bench beside the bell, head bowed, hands folded. He did not plan to sleep, but the quiet overtook him, gentle as a blessing. The final flakes settled around him, on his shoulders, his hair, the bronze curve of the bell. And in that stillness, time itself seemed to stop, not ending, not beginning, only breathing. Thus, the bell of winter's eve fulfilled its tender work, to bind cold to comfort, silence to song, and to remind all who listened that even in the deepest frost, the heart of the world still rings with warmth. Chapter 8. The Bell of Pilgrims and Roads. The frost had begun to loosen its hold. At the edge of St. Aviel, the first shy hints of thaw ran down from the hills like silver threads. Rivulets of meltwater whispered beneath the hedges, and the roads that had lain hard and pale all winter began to soften once more. The bell tower watched it, its bronze heart, silent but patient, waiting to speak when the time was right. Winter was ending, and with its passing came the travelers. They appeared as small shapes upon the distant road, pilgrims, merchants, wanderers with staffs and satchels, moving slowly toward the village. Their cloaks were stained with dust and frost, yet their faces carried that same expression, all pilgrims' sheer mixture of fatigue and quiet hope. For them, St. Aviel was a place not only to rest, but to listen. They had heard of its bell, and how its tone was said to heal the weary heart. That morning, Father Ambrose climbed the tower early. The sky was washed in faint gold, and a thin mist drifted above the river. He looked out upon the road and saw the small procession winding closer, no grand march, only the patient rhythm of footsteps. He smiled, for he remembered his own journeys long ago, when he had wandered from monastery to monastery, seeking a home. The road, he thought, was a kind of prayer. One step, one breath, one heartbeat after another. He placed his hands on the rope and gave a slow, steady pull. The bell answered with a tone both bright and deep, neither of summer's cheer nor winter's solemnity, but something between. It sounded like the promise of warmth returning, the murmur of distant hearths calling the traveler home. Gong. Across the fields the note unfurled, clear and calm. Gong. The second tone followed, a little higher, carrying through the mist like a blessing stretched along the road. The pilgrims heard it before they saw the tower. One woman raised her head and smiled through the chill. "It sounds like bread baking," she whispered, and the others nodded, though none could explain why they understood. By the time they reached the square, the villagers were already gathering. The baker set loaves upon a wooden board, their crusts steaming in the cold. Children carried pails of warm water for washing the pilgrims' hands. From the chapel doorway, Father Ambrose watched and felt his heart ease. The bell had done what words could not. It had drawn together the wanderers and the dwellers, the known and the unknown, into a single quiet moment of kindness inside the chapel. Candles burned in a long row down the aisle. The air smelled of wax and pine. Each pilgrim knelt for a while before the small carved cross, but there were no formal prayers, no confessions demanded. Only silence, shared, gentle, sufficient. Outside, the bell's faint echo still lingered, like a thread tying them to the open road they had come from. When the villagers began to serve the meal, Laughter rose softly. Steam drifted from bowls of stew, and the hum of conversation filled the hall like low music. An old man from the road spoke of distant monasteries where the bells were so many that they seemed to argue with one another. A young woman described a sea she had crossed, where no bells could be heard at only waves that sounded like breathing. Father Ambrose listened with the patience of stone, smiling now and then, his eyes warm but far away. He knew that when these travellers departed, the sound of St. Aviel's bell would go with them. It would ring quietly in their memories, keeping them company on lonely stretches of road. And so the bell's reach would grow, not through distance, but through remembrance. That evening, as the sun slid down behind the hills, Father Ambrose climbed the tower once more. The pilgrims had gone, leaving behind only footprints that already blurred in the damp earth. The air smelled faintly of rain and thawing soil. He looked toward the west, where the road curved out of sight, and for a moment he imagined the bell's tone traveling endlessly along it, trolling through valleys, across bridges, over plains, and into the hearts of other wanderers he would never meet. He drew the rope again, gently. The sound that rose was softer than before, touched with the weariness of day's end. It was a sound of gratitude, of parting, of peace. Gong. The note spread slowly, fading into the wide quiet of evening. Gong, one more, to bless the road. Gong. A final breath, long and low, to fold the world into rest, down in the village. Annalise heard the dusk bell while closing the bakery door. She paused, looking toward the tower's shadow against the pink sky. It comforted her to think that somewhere on the far road, the travellers might also be listening, hearing the same fading echo. For a heartbeat, it felt as if the world were small and kind again, bound together by a single sound drifting through twilight. Father Ambrose stood at the tower window until the sky turned completely blue-grey. He whispered, "Wherever they walk tonight, let them carry peace." Then he turned, descended the stairs, and the bell went still. And so the bell of pilgrims and roads fulfilled its quiet calling to guide the wandering, to rest the weary, and to remind every soul that the road to has its own gentle song. Now the air of St. Aviel lies soft again. The paths are silver in moonlight, and the tower waits, ready to speak when the next traveller needs its voice. Let the candlelight return, soft and golden, as St. Aviel enters a time of warmth and celebration. The bells are ready once more. Chapter 9. The Bell of the Abbey Feast. Days of cold had begun to ease their hold on the valley. Each dawn broke a little earlier. Each afternoon lingered a little longer. Beneath the last patches of snow, green began to show small, brave shoots pressing through frost-softened earth. And with that subtle change came a ripple of anticipation through St. Aviel. The villagers knew the season, the time of the Abbey feast, when the bell would call not to work or prayer, but to gratitude and joy. For generations, the feast marked the turning between winter and spring. It was when the people brought their finest breads and cheeses to the square, when candles filled the chapel windows, and when laughter returned to the valley like birds returning to their nests. No heralds announced it, no banners waved, only the bell. When its tone shifted from the slow solemnity of winter to the brighter voice of renewal, everyone understood the feast had begun. That morning, Father Ambrose rose while the sky was still pearl grey. He wrapped his cloak around his shoulders, for the chill had not entirely left, and walked toward the tower. The stones of the stair were cold beneath his sandals, but the air smelled different now, lighter, touched with thaw and the faint scent of soil waking from sleep. When he reached the top, he looked out over the village. Thin wisps of smoke rose from chimneys, and along the fields small dots of colour moved, villagers gathering herbs and early flowers to adorn the tables. Even the river seemed livelier, glinting under the first sunlight. He rested his hand on the rope and closed his eyes. For a moment he remembered the winters of his youth, the hard snow, the endless nights, the ache of loneliness. Then he thought of the present, how each season, each sound, flowed into the next like notes in a single unending hymn. He smiled, breathed deeply, and pulled. The first bell of the feast rang bright and low, neither hurried nor loud. It rolled outward through the still air, filling it with warmth that was not yet in the weather itself. The second note followed slightly higher, clearer, carrying over rooftops, across meadows, into the woods where snow still lingered in shadows. By the third, the valley seemed to awaken all at once. Doors opened. Laughter spilled into the lanes. Children ran, calling to one another, their voices joining the echo like birds answering the dawn dot inside the bakery. Annalise felt the vibration before she heard it. The dough beneath her hands seemed to tremble slightly, as if even the bread recognized the feast. She smiled, wiped the flour from her cheek, and opened the window. Cool air rushed in, smelling of pine and meltwater and something new, something alive. "It's time," she said softly, and her brother, Thomas, taller now and strong from the harvest months, nodded with a grin. He reached for the small silver bell that hung beside the oven door and rang it once in answer. The two tones, bronze from the tower and silver from the cottage, met in the air like old friends greeting across distance by mid-morning. The square of St. Aviel was alive with gentle commotion. Tables were set end to end and covered in linen. Bowls of honey, loaves of bread shaped like suns, wheels of cheese wrapped in cloth. Each offering carried a story, a memory of the hands that made it. From the Abbey gates came the monks, carrying wreaths of evergreen and early blossom, their robes fluttering in the breeze. They placed the wreaths around the base of the bell tower, so that even the stones seemed to wear spring. When the preparations were done, Father Ambrose stood upon the chapel steps. He raised a hand for quiet, though the crowd had already grown still. No one wished to miss a word of the blessing. His voice was gentle, shaped by years of chanting, and it carried effortlessly. "Through frost and night we have come," he said, "and the bell has kept our hearts steady. Now the earth opens again, and we open with it. Let every ring today be a seed of joy, and every silence between them a place where peace may grow." Then he stepped aside, and the bell began again. This time its song was different. It was lighter, filled with a kind of laughter that needed no sound of its own. The villagers clapped in rhythm, their palms echoing the slow swing of bronze. Children danced around the base of the tower, ribbons in their hands. The air shimmered with the mingling of voices, bells, and birds returning to the thawed trees. When the ringing stopped, the feast truly began. Platters passed from hand to hand. Mugs of warm cider were raised. Stories flowed as easily as the drink tales of winters survived, of kindness shared, of small miracles unnoticed until this moment of reflection. The bell tower loomed above them all, silent now, but glowing faintly in the afternoon sun. Father Ambrose moved among the people, blessing none with ceremony, but all with presence. When a child stumbled, he lifted her gently. When an elder grew tired, he fetched a chair and laid a hand upon their shoulder. He knew that the feast was not about grand words, it was about the rhythm of care. The music that lingered after the bell had ceased. As the sun began to sink, its light turned honey gold. Shadows stretched long across the square, and laughter softened into quiet conversation. One by one, candles were lit along the tables, their flames flickering like stars fallen to earth. The smell of pine smoke and bread filled the air. Overhead, the bell tower caught the last of the sun, its bronze rim blazing briefly before the light slipped away. Father Ambrose climbed the stairs one final time. He moved slowly, savoring each step as though he were ascending not a tower but a memory. At the top, he looked out upon the glowing village. The sound of gentle voices drifted up to him, mixed with the faint creak of the river thawing. He drew the rope toward him, and the bell answered with a tone so soft it seemed to come from the air itself. Gong. A note of gratitude. Gong. A note of farewell to winter. Gong. A blessing upon the light to come. The echoes rolled down into the square, and every conversation paused. People bowed their heads. Even the children fell silent. The final hum of bronze hung in the cool air like a thread of gold, then faded into night. When the last candle burned low and the tables were cleared, the villagers returned home. The moon rose high in silver, glinting off the river. In the quiet that followed, Father Ambrose remained by the bell, listening. He heard the faint creak of the timbers, the whisper of wind through the tower window, the soft far laughter still lingering in the valley. It sounded to him like prayer, though no words were spoken. He touched the side of the bell and smiled. "Sleep well, old friend," he murmured. "Tomorrow you shall rest. Tonight you have sung for the world." And so the bell of the Abbey feast fulfilled its golden task to weave joy through the weary, to remind hearts that every ending hums with a beginning, and to let peace ring clear and slow across the turning of the seasons. Now the fires fade, the stars blink awake. Saint Aviel sleeps in warmth and fullness, its bell dreaming quietly of spring. This is the final chapter, the closing of our journey through the bells of Saint Aviel. Let your breath slow, let the night settle around you, and let the story unfold like dawn returning after a long, gentle dream. Chapter 10. The last bell and the dawn. The air of Saint Aviel was quiet again. After the songs and laughter of the Abbey feast, the village had fallen into that rare kind of stillness that feels both full and weightless. Like the silence after a final note has faded, but before the echo is gone. Winter had completely passed now, and the first true warmth of spring lay like a veil over the valley. The days were longer, the nights were kind, and through it all the bell tower waited, holding the rhythm of time within its bronze heart. The villagers had begun their planting, the fields combed into neat furrows glistening with dew. Children ran between them, scattering seeds from little baskets, laughing as the sparrows followed in their wake. The river ran quick again, freed from ice, its surface catching the light like glass. Everywhere the sound of life returned, soft, measured, and tender. But Father Ambrose felt something else stirring beneath the season's brightness, something deeper, quieter. He was older now, his hair thin and white, his hands trembling slightly as he held his cup of morning tea. The bell had rung faithfully through all the years of his life, and he had been its keeper longer than anyone could remember. He knew, though, that time was preparing to move beyond him. That morning, as the mist lifted from the hills, Father Ambrose climbed the tower more slowly than usual. The air was fresh and damp, filled with the fragrance of earth and new blossoms. At each landing he paused, not out of fatigue, but to listen to the creak of wood, the faint drip of water on stone, the murmur of birds outside the window. He wanted to hear it all, to memorize the sound of the world he had loved so long. When he reached the top, he set his lantern aside, though he no longer needed it. Sunlight was already spilling into the small chamber, touching the bell's side with gold. The bronze gleamed softly, as though it too were waking from sleep. He rested a hand on the rim, tracing the fine cracks that had formed over the years. Each mark told a story of frost, a festival, a storm. The bell had weathered them all. It was more than metal now. It was memory, shaped by the breath of centuries. He whispered to it, "We have rung many mornings together, haven't we, old friend?" The air did not answer, but he felt the faintest vibration beneath his palm, as though the bell remembered too. Below, the village stirred. Doors opened, voices rose, and the smell of baking bread drifted through the square. The people were ready to begin another day. They did not know that this morning's bell would be different, that this would be Father Ambrose's last. He lifted the rope and gave a slow, steady pull. The first note rang clear and deep, purer than it had sounded in years. Gong. It rolled outward like a wave, shimmering through the soft morning air. It passed over the river, the cottages, the fields where children knelt to plant gong. The second tone followed richer, slower blending with the hum of bees, the rustle of wind, the faint laughter of distant voices. Gong. The third note carried farther than any before, lingering over the valley like a final benediction. Then silence. Perfect, sacred silence. The villagers paused in their work. They looked up toward the tower, hearing something in that silence they could not name. Somehow, they understood. Annalise placed her hands together, bowing her head. Tomas removed his hat and held it against his chest. Even the animals seemed to listen, the horses standing still, the dogs lying down, the birds hovering mid-song. The sound of that final bell lived in the air like breath, too soft to measure but too strong to fade. Father Ambrose stood beside it, eyes half closed, his hand resting still upon the bronze. The sun poured through the window, bright now, washing him in light. He felt the warmth upon his skin, felt the echo of the last tone reverberate through the wood and stone. It felt like a heartbeat, slow and steady. It felt like time itself exhaling. He whispered, "It is enough." Then he sat down upon the bench, folded his hands in his lap, and watched the light shift across the walls. Outside, the world went on the fields full of work and laughter, the sky clear and boundless. But up in the tower, everything was still. When the monks came later that morning, They found him there, peaceful, eyes closed, the faintest smile on his lips. The bell stood beside him, quiet and gleaming. It did not ring again that day. Word of his passing spread softly through Saint Aviel. There were tears, yes, but they were quiet ones. Everyone spoke of him not as one who had gone, but as one whose voice still lingered in the air. When evening came, the villagers gathered in the square with candles in their hands. They did not toll the bell for mourning, it was too heavy, too sacred for grief. Instead, they stood together beneath its tower and let the night fill with silence. And in that silence, many swore they heard it ring faintly, far off, as if the air itself remembered. Weeks passed, and spring deepened. The monks tended the tower, cleaning its steps, polishing its wood. A young novice, gentle and patient, was chosen as the new bellkeeper. He moved with quiet reverence, never hurried, never loud. When he pulled the rope for the first time, the sound that rose was soft, steady, sure, a tone that seemed to carry both farewell and beginning at once. The people smiled when they heard it. They said it sounded the same as before, but deeper somehow, as if the bell now sang with two voices. Years would come and go. Children would grow, the seasons would turn, and Saint Aviel would change, as all places do. But the bell endured. Its song continued to rise each morning, to drift through the fields at noon, to bless the valley at dusk. And whenever it rang, the villagers felt a kind of peace that words could not explain, as though every sound contained within it the gentle breath of the old bellkeeper, and the steady rhythm of his love for the world. In time, stories would spread beyond the valley of a bell that never rang harshly, of a village where time moved in harmony, of a tower where the sound of bronze could heal weariness and soothe the heart to rest. Travelers would come again, and when they heard the bell, they would pause mid-road, close their eyes, and feel the peace that had lived there for centuries. Some would say it was only the wind, others that it was prayer. But those who truly listened knew better. It was not the bell alone that sang. It was the memory of every hand that had ever tended it, every heart that had ever paused to hear. And so the sound lived on, a thread of gold woven through the tapestry of time. Thus the last bell of Saint Aviel fulfilled its eternal calling, to mark not the end of ours, but the continuity of peace, to teach that every echo is a beginning, and that even silence rings, softly, forever. Now the story rests. The tower stands quiet under dawn's first light. The bell waits, breathing in stillness. And if you listen very closely in the hush before morning, when the world is barely awake, you may still hear it far and faint, gong, one gentle note of bronze and light, calling the heart home once more.